Please be seated. The reading this morning is from the 16th chapter of 1 Samuel. Now the Lord said to Samuel, "You have mourned long enough for Saul. I've rejected him as king of Israel, so fill your flask with olive oil and go to Bethlehem. Find a man named Jesse who lives there, for I have selected one of his sons to be my king." But Samuel asked, "How can I do that? If Saul hears about it, he will kill me." "Take a heifer with you," the Lord replied, "and say that you have come to make a sacrifice to the Lord. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you which of his sons to anoint for me." So Samuel did as the Lord instructed. When he arrived at Bethlehem, the elders of the town came trembling to meet him. "What's wrong?" they asked. "Do you come in peace?" "Yes," Samuel replied, "I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Purify yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice." Then Samuel performed the purification ritual for Jesse and his sons, invited them to the sacrifice too. When they arrived, Samuel took one look at Eliab and thought, "Surely this is the Lord's anointed." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Don't judge by his appearance or height, for I have rejected him. The Lord doesn't see things the way you see them. People judge by outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." Then Jesse told his son Abinadab to step forward and walk in front of Samuel. But Samuel said, "This is not the one the Lord has chosen." Next, Jesse summoned Shemaiah, but Samuel said, "Neither is this the one the Lord has chosen." In the same way, all 7 of Jesse's sons were presented to Samuel. But Samuel said to Jesse, "The Lord has not chosen any of these." Then Samuel asked, "Are these all the sons you have?" "There is still the youngest," Jesse replied, "but he's out in the field watching the sheep." Okay. They cut it off, sorry. "Send for him at once," Samuel said. We will not sit down to eat until he arrives." So Jesse sent for him. He was dark and handsome with beautiful eyes. And the Lord said, "This is the one, anoint him." So as David stood there among his brothers, Samuel took the flask of olive oil he had brought and anointed David with the oil. And the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David from that day on. Then Samuel returned to Ramah. David serves in Saul's court. Now the Spirit of the Lord had left Saul, and the Lord sent a tormenting spirit that filled him with depression and fear. Some of Saul's servants said to him, "A tormenting spirit from God is troubling you. Let us find a good musician to play the harp whenever the tormenting spirit troubles you. He will play soothing music, and you will soon be well again." "All right," Saul said, "find me someone who plays well and bring him here." One of the servants said to Saul, "One of Jesse's sons from Bethlehem is a talented harp player. Not only that, he is a brave warrior, a man of war, and has good judgment. He is also a fine-looking young man, and the Lord is with him." So Saul sent messengers to Jesse to say, "Send me your son David, the shepherd." Jesse responded by sending David to Saul along with a young goat, a donkey loaded with bread, and a wineskin full of wine. So David went to Saul and began serving him. Saul loved David very much, and David became his armor-bearer. Then Saul sent word to Jesse asking, "Please let David remain in my service, for I am very pleased with him." And whenever the tormenting spirit from God troubled Saul, David would play the harp. Then Saul would feel better, and the tormenting spirit would go away. Word of God, word of life.
Thanks be to God. Word of God, sweet, would you pour down like rain, washing my eyes to see your majesty, to be still and know that you're in this place. Please let me stay and rest in your holiness. Word of God, sweet.
The Lord be with you. How'd everybody love their lovely story time with Lori? 23 verses, leaving nothing to preach on. There was nothing included in any of that. You know, not a story about God being kind of tricky and sending somebody to anoint somebody else to be king without letting the first king know that, yeah, that I don't even understand. There is no implications that God's favor can be given and removed, causing good and bad things to happen. No hints that mental illness or mental breakdowns are caused by evil spirits. And no wondering, at least for me, about how much bread is a donkey loaded with bread. Anybody know? Right? All of this 23 verses sets the opening scene for the sermon series that we are headed into on David. It all sets the opening scene for this story. And most of us know David because David and Goliath, right? Small child, large giant. Or maybe you've heard that phrase or that verse, you heard there was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord. That would be this David that Leonard Cohen was talking about. Or you may know that David is credited with writing many of the Psalms. And all of this is part of David's story. And it's all part of David's story that we will be exploring over the next several weeks. But really, the truth is we will barely scratch the surface of the story of David. For the next several weeks, you will find an additional reading plan in the back of your bulletin and in the email for more to dive into depth. But at its core, know this. The story of David is a reminder that God often works through imperfect humans. And before we head forward into the story, I believe it's firmly important to take a minute to look back and remember how we got to where we are. I could give you a 45-minute to 3-hour sermon, starting at Genesis and walking you all the way up until this point, but I do not have the stamina for that kind of sermon. So we're just going to go back to the beginning of 1 Samuel, 16 chapters earlier. It's important to note that we are post-Exodus, so Moses has led the people out of Egypt and into the Promised Land, and they have now been trying to figure out for a while how to live as God's beloved and chosen people in this new land. They've been ruled by a series of judges and prophets, and that is where we find ourselves today. The book of 1 Samuel begins with a mother desperate for a child, pleading with God, and so when that child is born, she takes him to God, dedicates him to God, and he spends his rest of his life serving as a prophet, or serving at the temple with a prophet named Eli. That child is Samuel, the one who comes into our story that we heard today and anoints David. This is Samuel, who will soon have one of the most talked about and referenced call stories of being awoken in the middle of the night by a strange disembodied voice and receiving a call directly from God. And as the first act of that call, young Samuel, as a youngish child, must go to Eli, his mentor, and say, God told me that your sons have been being not nice, and so they will be punished. And by punished, Eli finds out, we mean they will be killed. And so true to some time passes and true to prediction, Eli's sons are killed in battle. And then in what may be one of my new favorite Bible verses, because I had no idea Bible verses like this were there, when Eli hears about the battle and his sons' deaths and the capture of the ark, we hear that Eli fell backward from his seat at the gate. He broke his neck and died because he was old and overweight. Things you did not know were in the Bible for 500, please. Right? So in place of Eli, Samuel becomes prophet, and there are some battles and trying to get the ark back, and Samuel becomes an old man in his ruling over these people. But like Eli before him, Samuel's sons are not like their father. They are corrupt and greedy. And so the Israelites, tired of this cycle of lovely people, not so great sons, they request to have a king just like everybody else. They want a king like all of the other nations. They want to be like the rest of the cool kids. And so Samuel brings this request to God. God says, give them a warning that human kings will be human kings, and they're not going to be great. They'll be corrupt and greedy and all the things that you've had issues with so far. Samuel gives them the warning, and they say, we really don't care. We'd just like a king, please. So in a whole other storyline, there is this guy named Saul. Saul is out and about one day because he's on a wild donkey chase, basically. He's lost his father's donkeys. And they decide to go to the wise man in a village who happens to be Samuel. And rather than helping Saul find the donkeys, Samuel says to Saul, you're the new king of Israel. Imagine going looking for some livestock and being put in charge of an entire nation. Right? Samuel anoints Saul as king. We enter Saul, the first king of Israelites' first rule. He rules for a lot of years. There are a lot of battles, a whole bunch of things happen. But true to form in God's prediction, humans are human leaders, and there are some issues. It starts when Saul isn't patient enough and doesn't wait for Samuel to do a sacrifice, and then Samuel doesn't do what he promised God he would do when he promised God that all of his soldiers would not eat during battle, and then Saul's son does eat some honey during a battle, and it's a mess. But trouble just keeps on coming for Saul, so much so that the verse directly prior to where we started our story today reads, God is sorry that he made Saul king. God is sorry that he made Saul king, which leads us to where we are today. In case you're interested, that was 16 chapters. That's it, of all drama. So if anybody ever tells you that the Bible is a boring story again, refer them to 1 Samuel, please. Because this whole story, from the corrupt sons of Samuel and Eli to the demand for a king to Saul's listening to the crowd above what he has promised God, is a reminder that we place our hope in what we place our trust. We place our hope in what we place our trust. So when the sons, Samuel and Eli's sons, place their trust and hope in money and power, they believe these are the things that will save them. The Israelites, tired of what they have, place their hope and trust in a king, not in God. And Saul places his hopes and his trust in the crowd's demand, not what he has heard from God or believes to be true of God. Over and over again, these stories, and really the stories throughout 1 and 2 Samuel, and both of the books of Kings, are reminders that human leaders will always fall short. They will screw up, they will make mistakes. And so at the end of the day, we as followers of God are reminded that our trust goes to God, not to human leaders. That we place our trust and therefore our hope in God, not our human leaders. Because, right, Eli fell short. Samuel fell short. So did both of their sons. Saul fell short. And so now here we are at David. God, annoyed with Saul, sends Samuel out to anoint a new king. That king is found not because Samuel anoints the one that looks all-powerful, but because they go to David, not the biggest, strongest brothers, but the one left behind tending the sheep. David is anointed, and the next stories that we will hear tell us of an amazing leader. Right? We all know some bits and pieces of David's story. We know that he is held up as this wonderful leader, a man after God's heart. And yet, time and time again, if you know the story of David, you know he falls short in small ways, but also some fairly significant mess-ups. And yet God continues to work through David. Now I'm going to have a minute of honesty here because I don't believe in doing anything else when I preach. You all have probably figured this out by now. As I was prepping for this sermon, in the background of all of the things was the seemingly political chaos of the past couple of weeks. If you've turned on the news, you know what I'm talking about. Even if you haven't turned on the news, you can't have missed what I am talking about. Right? And then on top of that exists all of the anticipation of what is coming and this election cycle and just all of the things in the world. And as a pastor, it sometimes is a struggle to decide how do we faithfully address what is happening in the world while also addressing our people's faith lives. Right? We can pretend it's not happening. We can stick our heads in the sand and not address it and just pretend life is great, so follow Jesus. Yay. But that is not faithful to our call as God's followers, right? That's not faithful to what God wants from us. Because our faith and our life are intertwined. What happens in here impacts who we are out there, and what happens out there impacts the prayers and the hopes and the fears and everything that we bring before God and the way we give worship to God in here. Now, I will never stand up here and endorse a candidate or a political party. I will never tell you what to do, partially because I'm not really sure that's my job as your pastor, but also because I am pretty sure that God is not Democrat or Republican, conservative or liberal, because God, I think, is beyond all of our political parties and more interested in how we treat one another. What I know for sure, though, is that in certain times and in times of chaos and in times of turmoil, our desire for certainty gives way for fear. Our desire to be certain, to take care of ourselves and our family gives way to fear. Fear that drives us apart from each other rather than bringing us closer together. Rather than living in the hard spaces of the sometime in between, we try and step into certainty that brings us to fear. Fear of others, fear of the unknown, fear of being wrong. And we seek ways to justify and make ourselves certain without embracing the complexities of life. Like Samuel and Eli's sons, we put our trust and our hope in money and power. Like the Israelites, we place our trust in political and human leaders, sometimes even pastors, which is not where our hope and trust belongs. I don't want it, right? Like Saul, we place our trust in the crowds and the masses. But that is not who we are called to be. Because the story of David, like Saul and Samuel and Eli before him and the leaders who will follow, is an invitation to step into a different way of being in the world. Like Samuel being told by God when he is sent to anoint David not to look at strength and might, but to listen for God's heart and God's call, we are called into the same thing. Because in the middle of chaos and turmoil, our hope is in God who is constant. Our hope is the one who created us and shaped us, who calls us beloved, who is interested in the good of all of the beloved, who is the ultimate source of hope and trust. When the world feels bigger and scarier than we can imagine, when we feel desperate for some certainty, ready to step into a way of living that is black and white rather than embracing the gray and colors that exist in between, these stories are a reminder that we turn not to humanity and human leaders, but to the divine, who rules not from strength and power, but out of love and compassion for the entire world. Because when it feels all too scary, when it feels all too overwhelming to know how our faith in here impacts our lives out there and vice versa, how we are called to be in the world, God is the one who calls us to place our hope and our trust in the Creator, who breathed life into dust, who created beauty out of chaos, and who shapes each and every one of us into beloved beings. That is the call. Because the story of David, the story we will spend the next several weeks with, shows us the way that God works through a very, very imperfect human to show us the beauty of God's creation and love. And all of God's people say, amen. As a note, like the thing we didn't get to, right, was that when Saul starts to lose touch with reality, his people say, well, let's get some music in there because that will help. We don't have a harp player named David. We have a band and musicians. So I get to turn it over to Matt and Sacred Edge today as a reminder that when we don't know how to pray or what to pray, sometimes music can be the way forward. So I invite you to stand and join us in singing.
Before I spoke a word, you were singing over me. Before I took a breath, you breathed your life in me. You have been so kind to me. You have been so kind to me.
The overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God, and oh, it chases me down. deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God.
When I was your foe, still your love fought for me. You have been so, so good to me. When I felt no worth, you paid it all for me. You have been so, so kind to me.
And oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. And I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me.